And welcome back. So this video is about the last subsection in topic 2. It's about eco-design. Some of these things you've seen before again, but we'll go a little bit more in detail about life cycle analysis and have a look at a couple of other things, okay? So an overview is a little bit about that cradle to cradle as opposed to cradle to grave, some of that life cycle analysis. Look at some considerations, some checklists, some softwares, and some other technologies. So just again, remember those differences between green design and eco design. So remember, green design has specific strategies and specific objectives versus when we talk about eco design, it's a big chunk of it is about this life cycle analysis and the whole process, okay? So I'd suggest just take a minute and read through a couple of these because these are some of the things that are important that we're going to read or you're going to talk a little bit about in this topic, okay? So press pause, have a read, and then when you're ready to go, press play again, okay? So this one you've seen before, right? There are three important parts to green design, eco design, waste management in this topic. That's materials, energy, and pollution. But the thing about eco design is rather than looking at just objectives and strategies, what eco design is more about the entire process. So it's looking at all these different things from the beginning to the very end of that process. It says that it's a little bit more comprehensive than green design, but you'll see some parallels as we keep going. Saw this one before. Instead of cradle to grave, this cycle where you extract materials out, put them into the ground after they're finished, throw things away, problems with landfills, et cetera, this is about cradle to cradle. There was an architect, William McDonough, who talked a lot about these types of things. So that's a big part of it, is these cradle to cradle philosophy as opposed to cradle to grave. You remember those two words or terms. So life cycle analysis, this is the second time you've seen it, but we'll look a little bit more at it. And again, if you haven't done so already, I want you to create that matrix to say which, based on a topic or a product of your choice. Okay, so remember, this is a tool that helps decision makers in manufacturing and government to decide what they want to do with their product, how they can change the process. Circular economies, again, it's similar to that cradle to grave. We've seen this before. Circular instead of parallel. We talked about this at the beginning of this topic, so this shouldn't be unfamiliar. If you look into the presentation, you can click on some of these videos to have a look to get more information if you'd like. Okay, but really it's about that following the entire process, circular economy, life cycle analysis, this big circle of information and what to do with it. Okay, about phones, more about cell phones, that extraction, distribution, disposal, waste, what happens to it. Story of Stuff does a really good, they talk a lot about that cycle. So again, if you've got some time, it's a 20-minute video, have a look to understand a little bit more about that process. It's a little bit biased and kind of negative to consumers, but it's useful. So life cycle analysis. Key stages of that analysis. Again, we've talked about this before, but to remind you and go over it a little bit more, pre-production, production, distribution, utilization, and disposal. Those are the important points. Then, so the considerations, here's the stages, here's the considerations. So things that that are considered when the life cycle analysis is being done or undertaken for a particular product. So remember, here's this matrix. You've seen this before. So make sure that you've got it in there, and there is a question on the form for you to answer. All right. Thought this was pretty good. Maybe I get a smile out of it. Okay. So here's telling you how to use the environmental impact matrix. Remember, this is a way to represent the data and show information about those different stages and using those considerations. So here with the refrigerator, the stages and the considerations. Create that, put that in your notes. You do show me that you've done it, and just make sure you're thinking about it. You don't need to do a whole lot of research, but even in your own mind, just so you understand how it can be represented, right? So card is the same type of thing. So remember that there can be different weights. So these different stages, maybe they weigh differently and maybe they more or less, like in driving is a big one that takes up a lot of the energy consumption. So it's important to just understand that there are different weights that these different considerations can take. So you can see that the use, it's a big part of the car and in that matrix. So it's, even though it says high, low, medium, low, wherever what your matrix looks like, it should be considered, or it should be understood that there's different factors in different contexts. Okay. So all this data also allows you to compare these different types of things that you can communicate with clients or anyone else that needs to see it. So right here, if you show this graph to somebody, you can easily see, okay, the Civic versus the Civic Hybrid. What do they do? And you can look at it pretty quickly to understand that there's a difference. Same type of thing with these. Prius, the gasoline versus the CO2 versus the new cars. So here's gasoline cars versus Prius. How much energy does it take? What's the maintenance like? What's the material production? So see, the material is a little bit more for the Prius in CO2 output versus gasoline cars are a little bit less. So it's just a way to communicate this information to other people. Same type of thing. So say somebody wants to put siding or put some different types of walls on their house. So you could see how this life cycle environment, life cycle assessment was used to represent or to show somebody. So your best, like the least amount of energy used is cedar wood as opposed to bricks that take up a whole lot of energy. So you can compare easily and understand the difference between the two as you're flipping through and looking at the data. Okay, and it's important because these types of people, as it's shown or as it's created differently, you can also decide which is important and which one's not. It's going to be affected, it's going to make an impact, but it's up to the manufacturer or the designer to decide which ones, the company to decide which points are the most important to them. So based on all this data that's presented, now what do they do with it? Companies can decide if they want to prioritize one thing or the other. So for example, Toyota, carbon fiber is very lightweight, high strength properties, really, really, really good material that can be used for cars. However, the energy used in the actual production cost more than while they're using the car. So because it costs so much in that production stage, they figured out that, well, it's best if we just keep to our typical fiber glass exteriors rather than using carbon fiber exteriors, because even though it doesn't actually make that much sense for us in the long run. So they're able to prioritize and make those decisions based on all the data collected. Same type of thing. Large volume companies are the best one to try to figure out this out. We've seen this before in another video. So it's just a matter of deciding and prioritizing what should you do, what shouldn't you, looking at toxic materials and how those are impacted. So if you look at these types of bulbs, right, the CFL bulbs, what happens in their disposal is it's pretty bad. It's a big environmental impact, even though their usage is a lot less, their energy use during the use phase, during the utilization stage is less the disposal is great because it has mercury inside some of these bulbs, so it can make a big impact, and it's just understanding those impacts and how to prioritize them. So it can be about production, so how much the production can change, and then how much harm it can inflict on the environment or people or things. So thinking about that Toyota and thinking about those light bulbs, what are the differences between those two and how can you prioritize? So some advantages and disadvantages. So if you look at a disadvantage, it takes a lot of time, and there's no one exact way to do it. There's lots of different ways to look at it. Consultations can be expensive, so it's hard to, it's a holistic process that's difficult to capture all this information. But big benefits in the long run could be cost and environmental impact for the company, as well as consumers understanding and making it more eco-friendly type of product. So that's a big part of the life cycle analysis. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about that one before, but to remind you and a little bit more details about the LCD, the life cycle analysis. Okay. Excuse me. I think I'm going to take a pause before we go on to this information about some other little details that can be used in that holistic process of eco-design. Okay, see you in a minute.